Welcome, everyone. So glad you could make it.
The decorations are lovely.
Yeah, so many wonderful gifts.
It all started like any other family gathering, the kind where the air feels thick with unspoken judgments masked by polite smiles. The house was dressed up with pastel decorations, the scent of catered food drifting from the kitchen, and the sound of small talk floating across the living room. Everyone had come to celebrate her newest milestone, her baby's gift ceremony, a chance for her to show off not just the child, but her ability to host an event that could impress the entire family. From the moment guests began arriving, it was clear this wasn't about warmth or togetherness. It was about display, about who could outshine whom. Laughter carried just a little too loudly. Compliments felt rehearsed, and eyes darted quickly from one detail to the next, searching for something to whisper about later. Still, everyone played their part, setting gifts on the table, hugging a little too tightly, smiling a little too wide. But beneath that polished surface, the room hummed with tension, a quiet anticipation, as though everyone sensed that the day would not unfold as smoothly as she had planned. The stage was set, and it wouldn't be long before the cracks began to show. The family gift ceremony began with an air of anticipation, as though every detail had been rehearsed to perfection. The living room was draped in pastel ribbons, soft balloons bobbing in corners, and a carefully arranged table overflowing with snacks and sweets. Every chair was aligned, every cushion fluffed, and every vase filled with flowers that looked like they had been plucked straight from a magazine spread. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a showcase. Guests were greeted at the door with forced smiles, each handshake and hug a little too practiced, as though the warmth had been trained into them. The sister-in-law floated around in a dress that matched the decor, her hair perfectly styled, her expression the very picture of hostess pride. As people settled in, murmurs of appreciation drifted around the room, not entirely genuine, but loud enough to be heard. "Oh, everything looks so lovely," someone said, eyeing the table of finger foods. Another commented on the floral centerpieces, while one guest leaned in to whisper about how much effort she must have spent on the decorations. These compliments seemed to feed her energy, making her shoulders square and her smile sharpen. She made sure to accept them graciously, but there was a glimmer in her eyes that revealed this was the exact reaction she had hoped for. The gift table became the centerpiece of the entire setup, draped with a silky cloth and stacked with shiny, ribbon-wrapped boxes that gleamed under the light. Guests trickled in with their offerings, setting them down in neat rows while carefully noting what others had brought. The sister-in-law hovered nearby, rearranging the gifts so the larger ones caught attention first, the smaller ones tucked discreetly behind. Every package seemed to matter less as a gesture of love and more as a marker of status, a way of silently saying who cared more, who spent more, who mattered more. Children ran around the edges of the room, their laughter echoing off the walls, but the adults barely noticed. The true performance was happening at the center of the gathering, where each new arrival was greeted with exaggerated cheer. People leaned in for hugs, complimented one another's outfits, and then subtly glanced at the growing mountain of presents. There was an unspoken competition weaving itself into the event, an invisible thread pulling everyone's attention toward the spectacle of generosity. The food and drinks only added to the impression that this wasn't simply a family gathering, but a curated affair. Glasses of sparkling juice were passed around. Little trays of pastries disappeared almost as quickly as they were set out, and the soft background music created an atmosphere that felt more like a staged event than an intimate celebration. Every detail was meant to impress, every choice carefully measured to send a message. She could host, she could entertain, she could outdo anyone else in the family. What should have felt warm and comforting carried instead a subtle tension, a pressure to perform. Guests smiled politely as they settled into their seats, but their eyes kept darting toward one another, silently comparing their roles in this orchestrated show. Conversations drifted toward the practical, how much effort it must have taken, how expensive certain details must have been, but underneath the small talk was the awareness that this was not about the baby at all. It was about presentation, about image, about making a mark that couldn't be ignored. As the ceremony unfolded, there was an almost theatrical rhythm to the way things progressed. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she had orchestrated every possible outcome. Guests followed the script, clapping at the right times, admiring the Dacre, and making sure their words of praise floated loudly enough to reach her ears. No one dared to step out of line, not yet, because the performance demanded cooperation. And so the family gift ceremony began, not with warmth or connection, but with the heavy weight of expectation. Every glance, every whispered comment, every perfectly placed flower spoke of control and calculation. What was meant to be a celebration of life and family had already shifted into something else entirely, an exhibition, a stage where the stakes were higher than anyone admitted aloud. As the afternoon stretched on and more relatives filled the room, the subtle undercurrent of rivalry began to surface. It wasn't loud or confrontational, not the kind of drama that plays out in obvious arguments, but it was there in every glance and every hushed remark. When the gifts began to pile up higher on the carefully decorated table, each package became more than just a token of love. It became a silent comparison, a way of measuring affection and importance within the family. Eyes lingered on the size of boxes, the shimmer of wrapping paper, the weight of bags that hinted at something expensive inside. The first crack appeared when someone arrived with a particularly lavish-looking present, its glossy gold wrapping paper tied with an elaborate bow. Gasps of admiration slipped from a few lips, followed by low murmurs about how much it must have cost. The sister-in-law's face lit up, though not because of gratitude. It was pride, thinly veiled as delight. She held the package up for everyone to see before placing it right at the front of the display, where it gleamed under the light like a trophy. Other guests shifted in their seats, quietly noting how their own contributions would look in comparison. It didn't take long before whispers started to ripple through the room. A cousin leaned close to another, remarking that some gifts seemed too showy, while others were a little underwhelming. Someone else remarked on how one particular relative always gave practical things, never flashy, as though it wasn't enough to simply show up and care. The air became thick with judgment wrapped in polite smiles, and though the laughter and chatter continued, there was a sharpness beneath it all. Every gesture, every word seemed to be measured against the unspoken hierarchy of generosity. The sister-in-law played into it, perhaps without even realizing how obvious she had become. Each time a new gift was unwrapped or mentioned, she would exaggerate her reaction, gasping loudly at the expensive-looking ones, offering a quick but polite thank you for the simpler ones. She didn't outright dismiss anyone's effort, but her tone and body language told a different story. She beamed proudly when she received something costly, nodding with approval as if the giver had passed an unspoken test. But when someone presented something more modest, a handmade blanket, a set of small baby clothes, her smile tightened, and she quickly moved on to the next. Guests began to notice, and tension built quietly around the room. No one said anything directly, but you could see it in the way people shifted in their chairs, the way conversations turned into pointed jokes that carried an edge. A few relatives rolled their eyes discreetly, others exchanged knowing looks, and some leaned back as though distancing themselves from the entire competition. The atmosphere, once filled with the hum of small talk, now carried an undertone of discomfort, Even the children who had been running around earlier seemed to sense something had changed. Their laughter grew quieter as the adults became more focused on the gift table than on enjoying the gathering. The pile of presents had become a mirror, reflecting not love or joy, but the unspoken rivalries and insecurities that often lay just beneath the surface in family dynamics. At one point, a relative tried to break the tension by complimenting the decorations again, steering the conversation away from the gifts, but it didn't last. Someone quickly returned to commenting on how thoughtful a certain package seemed, and once again the comparisons flared up. Each new arrival brought with them another chance for judgment, another round of subtle sigh, dies, and whispered appraisals. The sister-in-law, basking in the attention, continued to showcase each item as if she were the curator of an exhibition, oblivious, or perhaps unwilling, to notice the strain it was causing. By then, it was clear that the ceremony wasn't just about celebrating a new baby or bringing the family together. It had turned into an unspoken contest, where every gift was weighed not only for its monetary value, but also for the message it sent about loyalty, effort, and standing in the family. Those who gave extravagantly seemed to rise in her favor, while those who kept things simple were quietly nudged to the sidelines. The room carried the weight of comparison, a constant hum of who was winning and who was falling short, and though everyone kept smiling, the edges of those smiles were beginning to crack. From the very beginning, it was clear that the sister-in-law wasn't hosting this ceremony just to celebrate her baby. Every choice she made, from the decorations to the order of the program, revealed a deeper purpose. This was her moment to shine, to elevate herself above everyone else in the family. She moved through the room with a kind of calculated grace, her posture tall, her chin slightly raised, her voice carrying just enough authority to remind everyone that she was the center of attention. When she spoke, she lingered on her words, drawing out her gratitude as though she were addressing an audience instead of a gathering of family. It was less about creating warmth and more about cementing her position as the one who could outdo, outshine, and outmaneuver the rest. She orchestrated the entire event like a stage performance. Every time someone approached her, she greeted them with an overly enthusiastic embrace, the kind that drew eyes from across the room. Her compliments often sounded rehearsed, carefully chosen to make her appear gracious and generous, but there was always an edge, a subtle way she turned even her gratitude into an opportunity to highlight her own efforts. "Oh, thank you for noticing," she would say if someone complimented the decorations, quickly following it with, "I just wanted everything to be perfect for today. It took weeks of planning." The words seemed innocent enough, but the underlying message was clear. No one else could have pulled off something quite like this. As the spotlight lingered on her, she leaned into it with precision. When gifts were presented, she held each one up just long enough for everyone to notice before commenting on it in a way that somehow circled back to her. If it was an expensive or glamorous gift, she praised the giver loudly, but then tied the moment back to her own taste. "It's just perfect. It matches the style I envisioned for the nursery." If it was something modest, she offered a brief smile and a polite word before redirecting attention elsewhere. She wasn't careless in her dismissals. She was strategic, careful not to create open conflict. But the hierarchy she was crafting was obvious to anyone paying attention. What stood out most was how she seemed to use the baby, the supposed center of the event, as little more than a prop. While relatives tried to coo and dote on the child, she positioned herself as the filter through which every interaction had to pass. The baby was held in her arms like an accessory, carried through the room while she soaked up the admiration. Instead of letting others naturally share affection, she often interjected, "Oh, she's been fussy today, but she calms down with me," or "He only smiles like that when I'm holding him." It was subtle, but the implication was clear. Even in motherhood, she was exceptional, incomparable. The way she spoke about the future, revealed even more of her intentions. In conversations, she often drifted into how she wanted the baby to be raised, the values she wanted to instill, and the kind of opportunities she would provide. Her tone carried a hint of superiority, as though she were gently reminding everyone else that her child would be brought up with more refinement, more care, more privilege. Family members exchanged glances as she spoke, recognizing that these weren't just idle comments, but deliberate statements meant to place herself, and by extension her child, on a pedestal. Some relatives attempted to engage with her, offering their own stories of raising children, bits of advice, or gentle humor about how unpredictable babies could be. Instead of embracing those moments of connection, she used them as opportunities to reassert her authority. If someone suggested a traditional family remedy for soothing a baby, she would smile politely but quickly explain why her method, backed by research or a more modern approach, was superior. If another relative reminisced about how challenging parenting had been for them, she responded with confidence about how prepared she was, how she had already thought of everything. Each exchange reinforced the unspoken narrative. She was different, she was more capable, and she wanted everyone to know it. The more the evening unfolded, the clearer it became that the ceremony was not about gratitude or celebration, but about control. She was shaping the event into a statement, one that placed her above the petty squabbles of family dynamics, even as she fueled them. Every detail, every remark, every gesture was designed to elevate her status, to craft an image of herself as the flawless hostess, the perfect mother, the one everyone else would have to measure themselves against. What should have been a simple family gathering had been transformed into a showcase of her ambitions. She wasn't just throwing a gift ceremony, she was declaring her place within the family hierarchy, building her pedestal with every word and every carefully managed smile. As the ceremony continued, the carefully polished surface of the event began to chip away, and the hidden tensions within the family slowly started to spill into conversations. At first, it was subtle, just small remarks tucked between pleasantries, words that sounded harmless but carried a heavier meaning for those who knew the history behind them. Someone made a comment about how not everyone can throw such a lavish event. Their smile sweet but their eyes sharp. Another relative chuckled about how some people must have been saving up for this, the laughter ringing with a touch of envy. The sister-in-law pretended not to notice, but her tightened posture and fixed grin gave her away. As people clustered in groups, conversations grew more layered, each one carrying undertones of rivalry and old resentments. Cousins gathered near the drinks table whispered about how extravagant the decorations seemed compared to past family gatherings. They compared it to simpler celebrations thrown years before, ones that felt warmer, less performative. In another corner, an aunt reminisced about how gift ceremonies used to focus on blessings rather than competition, her voice tinged with disapproval. Though her words were wrapped in nostalgia, they were clearly directed at the sister-in-law's choices. The room buzzed with overlapping dialogues, and though laughter floated above it all, the weight of judgment pulsed just beneath. The gifts, once seen as tokens of affection, had become fuel for these conversations. Guests who had brought smaller, more modest items felt the need to justify them aloud. "It's the thought that counts," one person said with a laugh, as though trying to convince themselves. Another explained how handmade gifts carried more love than store-bought ones, but the way they emphasized it suggested they had noticed the hierarchy forming around the table. On the other hand, those who had brought larger, flashier gifts leaned back in their seats, proud of the attention they had received, subtly gloating without saying a word. These differences, left unspoken in many families, were now magnified in the charged atmosphere of the room. Old grievances began creeping into seemingly unrelated conversations. An uncle joked that it was about time someone did something like this, a remark that sounded like praise, but also highlighted how others had fallen short in the past. A cousin teased another about how their gift seemed light compared to the rest, and though everyone laughed, the jab lingered. Even topics outside the ceremony somehow circled back to comparisons, jobs, houses, vacations, all woven into the evening like threads of competition. It was as though the event had given everyone permission to bring their quiet rivalries to the surface, disguised as casual chatter. The sister-in-law tried to maintain control, floating between groups with her rehearsed smile, but she couldn't silence the undercurrents. Every time she walked away, conversations shifted in tone. Relatives exchanged knowing looks, leaning closer to speak in hushed voices, careful not to be overheard. A few even made jokes about her constant need for attention, light-hearted on the surface, but heavy with truth. The laughter that followed carried less joy and more a sense of shared relief, a release of the tension that had been building all afternoon. Even the children seemed to pick up on the shift. Their playful noise faded as parents pulled them closer, urging them to sit still, as though too much freedom might add to the chaos. The once bustling room began to feel divided, pockets of whispered alliances forming as family members gravitated toward those who shared their opinions. Some defended the sister-in-law, arguing that she was just proud and wanted everything to be special. Others rolled their eyes, muttering that it was all for show. The division was subtle but undeniable, a line being drawn in the sand with every exchanged look and every sharp remark disguised as a joke. Moments of silence began to punctuate the event, awkward pauses that settled in after particularly pointed comments. Someone would laugh too loudly to break the tension, but it never fully worked. The balance of the gathering had shifted. What began as polite admiration had spiraled into a careful dance of jabs and judgments, each relative revealing just enough of their thoughts to be understood by those who knew the family dynamics. The smiles remained, the laughter continued, but it was clear to everyone present that the celebration had taken on a different tone entirely. It happened almost unexpectedly, the kind of moment no one could have predicted, yet it instantly shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. Up until that point, the sister-in-law had been carefully orchestrating every detail, controlling the flow of attention like a conductor leading an orchestra. But all it took was a single unexpected action to unravel her carefully woven performance and expose what had been hiding just beneath her polished exterior. The moment began innocently enough. A relative, perhaps tired of the unspoken competition, decided to speak from the heart instead of playing along. They brought forward a modestly wrapped package, nothing flashy, just a small box tied with a simple ribbon. Unlike the other gifts that glittered under the lights, this one stood out for its plainness. The sister-in-law accepted it with the same forced smile she had used all evening, though her eyes flickered with disappointment. She set it aside, ready to move quickly to the next, when the relative interrupted her usual rhythm. Instead of letting the gift fade into the background, the relative spoke up, their voice carrying more weight than the room expected. "This isn't the most expensive thing on the table," they admitted, their tone steady, "but it's from the heart. It belonged to our grandmother, and I thought it was right to pass it down, so the baby grows up with something from our family's history." They opened the box to reveal a delicate keepsake, something worn but beautiful, holding years of stories within its small frame. The room grew quiet. Whispers and side comments died instantly, replaced by a stillness that felt almost heavy. All eyes turned to the sister-in-law, waiting to see her response. For a split second, her expression faltered. The practiced smile slipped, and the prideful gleam in her eyes dulled. She hadn't prepared for this. Every other gift had been about appearance, about expense and glamour. but this one carried weight that money couldn't compete with. It wasn't just a present, it was a piece of the family, tied to memory and meaning. Her reaction came a moment too late, the hesitation enough for everyone to notice. She tried to recover, clapping her hands together, feigning excitement as she lifted the keepsake for the others to see. But her voice cracked slightly, her usual air of superiority dimmed by the sincerity of the moment. The relatives around her leaned forward, admiring the gift. Their murmurs filled not with judgment this time, but with genuine warmth. Someone even said aloud what others were thinking. Now that's a real treasure. The comparison was unavoidable, though no one spoke it directly. All the glittering boxes, the expensive gadgets, the shiny toys suddenly seemed hollow against the weight of something with real history. The sister-in-law's attempts to highlight her hosting skills, her extravagance, her ability to impress, all of it began to unravel in the face of a gesture that reminded everyone what family gatherings were supposed to be about. For the first time all evening, the spotlight wasn't on her. It was on the meaning behind the gift, on the reminder that love and memory outlast any display of wealth. She tried to steer the attention back, complimenting the giver, nodding too quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush as if to reassert control. But her effort only made it more obvious that she was flustered. Guests exchanged glances, some smiling knowingly, others nodding in quiet approval of the moment. A few chuckled softly, not unkindly, but with the kind of recognition that comes when truth breaks through pretenses. The tension in the room had shifted, no longer bound by rivalry, but by a shared realization. Even the baby, resting in someone else's arms by then, seemed calmer, as though sensing the change in the energy around them. The keepsake was passed around carefully, each relative taking a moment to admire it, to touch it, to remember where it had come from. Stories began spilling out, memories of the grandmother, anecdotes of times long past, and for the first time that day, the laughter sounded genuine. It wasn't about outdoing one another anymore. It was about remembering the ties that bound them together. For the sister-in-law, it was a moment she hadn't planned for, a crack in the perfect image she had built. She stood there still smiling, but her posture had shifted, her confidence slipping just enough for everyone to see. The unexpected gift had undone her strategy, revealing how much of her performance had been about show rather than substance. The backfire wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, but devastating all the same. In a single action, her true intentions had been exposed, and there was no taking it back. The shift was almost palpable, as if the air itself had changed. What had begun as an afternoon filled with polite compliments and veiled competition was now tilting in a direction the sister-in-law had never anticipated. The moment that keepsake was revealed and cherished, admiration for her hosting began to fade, replaced by a different kind of attention, one that she could neither control nor direct. The gathering, once her stage, became the backdrop for something else entirely. Instead of being remembered as the flawless hostess, she was slowly being seen as the woman who tried too hard, only to be overshadowed by a single genuine act. As the gift continued to make its way around the room, people leaned in closer to each other, their conversations suddenly less guarded, less performative. They shared stories about the grandmother, about family traditions, about the little things that tied them all together. The energy in the room softened, warmed, became something that couldn't be faked with decorations or catered food. Laughter rang out different from the forced chuckles earlier, this time full and real. Relatives who had been sitting stiffly in their seats now relaxed, their smiles reaching their eyes. The entire mood shifted into what the gathering should have been all along, family bonding over love and memory. The sister-in-law tried desperately to pull the attention back toward herself. She made comments about how she had thought of incorporating family traditions into the event, but hadn't had the time. She pointed out how much effort had gone into arranging everything, trying to remind them of her role as the architect of the day. But her words fell flat. The guests nodded politely, their attention drifting back to the keepsake, back to the conversations that no longer revolved around her. Every attempt to reassert control only highlighted how much she was losing it. It wasn't that people were openly mocking her. No, one had to. The backfire was subtle, but undeniable. Instead of admiration, there were knowing looks exchanged across the room, little smirks that said without words, "We see it now." Some whispered quietly, their tones filled with a mix of amusement and relief, as though they had been waiting for the moment when her facade would finally crack. Others didn't whisper at all. They simply ignored her, choosing to engage with one another instead of feeding her need for validation. Her embarrassment wasn't loud or explosive, but it was written all over her body language. Her shoulders stiffened, her laughter grew hollow, her once bright energy dimmed. She busied herself with straightening decorations that didn't need adjusting, collecting empty glasses, rearranging food on trays, small tasks that gave her something to do when no one was watching. Her enamor, for a woman who had built the day around being the center of attention, the sudden lack of it was harsher than any insult. Meanwhile, the other relatives seemed to blossom in her absence. Without the weight of her presence dominating the room, conversations became livelier, freer. People who had been hesitant to speak up earlier now shared openly. And the event turned into something far more genuine than what she had tried to stage. The irony was that the gathering only began to feel like a true celebration once her influence had slipped away. Even the children, who had been subdued by the earlier tension, were laughing again, playing noisily in the background as their parents watched with fond smiles. The music, once just a faint hum beneath the forced chatter, now seemed to blend naturally with the atmosphere. What she had tried so hard to create artificially had happened on its own, without her, and in spite of her. By then, the sister-in-law had realized she could no longer control the narrative. She smiled, she nodded, she played along, but she knew the truth. Her attempt to elevate herself had not only failed, but had left her exposed. The very thing she wanted most to be admired, envied, respected, had slipped through her fingers, replaced with a quiet acknowledgement among the family that sincerity would always outshine spectacle. And so, what began as a carefully curated event designed to cement her status had turned into the very opposite. Instead of walking away triumphant, she stood in the middle of a room that no longer revolved around her, realizing that her grand performance had collapsed under the weight of one small, meaningful gesture. The backfire was complete, and it left her stunned in its quiet devastation. In the end, what was meant to be a grand display of control and status became a lesson no one in the room would forget. The sister-in-law had set out to prove her importance through extravagance, hoping to command admiration with glittering gifts, flawless decorations, and her carefully orchestrated image. But when sincerity entered the picture, a small keepsake carrying love, history, and memory, her show unraveled. The family was reminded that no amount of glamour could replace genuine connection, and no display of wealth could outshine authenticity. Instead of admiration, she found herself standing in the shadow of her own intentions, while the rest of the family turned toward what truly mattered. The laughter, the stories, the warmth that followed weren't born from her planning, but from a moment of truth. What she never expected was that in trying to elevate herself, she exposed exactly how fragile her power really was.